We do have some interesting updates as far as the situation in Idaho, as well as an ambush of 2 police officers that happened up in Milwaukee just a few days ago. Remember to like, comment, subscribe. Let's go ahead and get into this. Mainstream media outlets are working overtime to make sure to cast the shooter as being a right-wing extremist. In other breaking news, water does indeed remain wet. First and foremost thing I need to correct from my last video, and I'm putting these out very, very quickly. Please forgive me. I'm going to try to update them as much as I can. It turns out that there were only 3 firefighters that were struck by bullets, no police officers. It was not 9 firefighters and 2 police officers. It is only 3 police officers who were shot, 2 of whom were dead, and 1 of whom is still struggling. His first 2 surgeries have gone well. He is awake at the hospital, and I'm going to keep him in my prayers. I suggest you do the same. And though I will admit I was wrong about something, I gotta say, I've never been more happy to be wrong. Less firefighters, 1/3 the amount that we originally thought, actually got hit by bullets. That's a W. I'm taking that one. I have never been happier to be wrong in my life. Cooney County Sheriff Bob Norris identified the suspected gunman as Wess Roley, 20 years old. And though, obviously, this man took away 2 innocent people's lives, put a 3rd in the hospital, we still don't know if the 3rd firefighter is going to survive. There's a more complex story here that's worth getting into. It's a sad waste of life for a 20-year-old to feel so disillusioned that he feels the need to lash out and get himself killed. It's just a terrible, terrible, terrible waste of life. We are also getting confirmation that it does look like Roley took his own life as opposed to having been shot by the police or FBI or other responders at the scene. This is from USA Today. Man accused of fatally shooting 2 firefighters in an ambush in rural Idaho on Sunday had, quote, Nazi tendencies in school, sketched pictures of guns and swastikas in a notebook, and was, quote, obsessed with guns, 3 former classmates told USA Today. It appears that Roley initially set the brush fire in order to lure the firefighters in with a flint starter that was found at the scene. We have all the usual suspects fighting on Twitter about whether or not the shooter was left-wing or right-wing. Of course, we have the right immediately saying, he looks feminine and a good conservative man would never have shot at firefighters, so of course he must be some woke, antifa, BLM, something, insert slew of conservative buzzwords. My apologies, I forgot to get a screen grab of this one. Still working without internet here. Forgive me for not having all the best visuals that I can. There was also some footage of Wess Roley allegedly being at a No Kings protest at some time in the last month. That was getting traction alongside what the leftists are doing. They're trying to cast him as being some gun-toting, Republican, recluse, some kind of a Nazi, some type of this, some type of that, insert slew of leftist buzzwords. The truth has turned out to be a little more nuanced than that. So some of the earliest information that we were getting was from an interview that CNN conducted with Wess Roley's grandfather, Dave Roley. Apparently, he had a pretty troubled life. Divorced parents, moving. His mother was in Phoenix and his father was in Idaho, which is how he ended up in the state in the first place. Dale Roley told CNN his 20-year-old grandson came from a family of arborists and had been working in the tree service industry while trying to figure out his career path. No manifesto has been found, but his grandfather says that Wess wanted to be a fireman in the forest specifically. Dale said he typically spoke with his grandson on a weekly basis, but they hadn't spoken in the last month because Wess had lost his phone. He said the suspect had loving family and friends, and he vacationed in Hawaii with his mother last year, according to social media posts. Officials said it appeared Wess Roley was living out of his vehicle, which remains on the scene and has not been inventoried yet. It wasn't like he was a loner, Dale Roley told CNN. We had no reason to suspect he would be involved in something like this. He said he was holding out hope that his grandson wasn't actually the shooter. Well, that's got to be just a heartbreaking thing for a grandfather to have to hear. 2 former classmates from when Roley was in Arizona painted a picture of a struggling student who occasionally lashed out in anger. He could be friendly at times, but was secluded from his peers. He would make us laugh so hard, a classmate said. They would play with airsoft guns, play video games, but sometimes, quote, it was difficult to play with him. You would take him in doses. Words directly from Roley's father. He told a CNN reporter outside his home in Priest River, Idaho, that he wasn't close with his son and hadn't seen him since a family gathering last year. Didn't respond to follow-up phone calls about the decade-old allegations and court documents, whatever, family drama from a long way. Part of why I find it so toxic for both sides to be trying to retroactively put, you know, political identities onto this kid. Because in my experience with 18, 19, 20, early 20s kids these days, is that a lot of the times they feel extremely alienated from their parents, specifically because their parents have very strong political identities that they expect their child to take on. And some kids just completely reject them and go the opposite side of the political spectrum, and some just reject politics entirely. And a lot of times in those cases, those kids can struggle to find their tribe of sorts, find groups where they really feel at home. You know, just because in the United States, like any institution other than politics has just been thoroughly dismantled. Religious institutions, cultural institutions, neighborhood level, community level institutions have all been thoroughly dismantled in the United States. And, you know, kids like these, regardless, it doesn't matter what his politics were. There are some photos floating around of his parents being at a Trump rally. Apparently his mom and his stepfather were hardcore Trumpers, and his dad was... Shut up, window security. I want to make sure to give full credit to the Idaho Tribune. Thank you so much for your research and being so helpful with this video, by the way. They are an openly conservative news outlet. I feel like I have to disclose that, even though it really shouldn't matter, but whatever. So they actually went looking for Wess Roley. He doesn't have much of an online profile. Well, we're going to see later a couple of his profiles on TikTok and Instagram may or may not have been banned by the sites. We're going to get into that, but apparently Wess was a furry and a My Little Pony head, and there are some implications we can take from that. Before we even get into that, though, I do want to point out how they were able to find this. So they actually went looking and found Wess's real name associated to a profile on chess.com, and were able to plug that username into other social media sites, and we're able to use that to track him down on TikTok. There is an Instagram profile attached to his TikTok as well. I went through that link. It did not work. Let's just keep breaking down the information that we do have. Any furries in the audience may feel free, genuinely, to correct me about my assertions about the community, though I feel like I've known enough, and I know a few of you guys are watching this, hey, by the way, and I feel like I need to talk about it because this is where the political divide really starts to break down. In my experience with the furry community, they vote Democrat because a lot of people in the furry community are on the spectrum and LGBT to some degree. It's not like a one-to-one, but they're very common things, and like the LGBT organizations are often, at least in America, linked to the furry organizations. Like there's overlap. They're not like in cahoots or something, but there's a lot of overlap between them. But interestingly, when you break down the actual ideas and principles of a lot of furries, they're actually quite staunch libertarians, which is weird because they're Democrats, but also makes a lot of sense because, like, there's a direct correlation between, you know, being firmly entrenched in the idea of personal liberty and willingness to go outside in a fursuit, you know? So based on my own personal experience, when I hear gun-toting furry, I'm not at all surprised. That actually tracks pretty cleanly. Here's his TikTok page, which you can see actually only has 7 videos on it, but he also says that he has been banned before. This is his second or however many accounts he's made at this point, which is mostly featuring his dog. And honestly, if I had to predict the waves of the news media and how these things tend to go, I'd expect the conservative-leaning outlets to start doing profiles on him as some sort of a furry degenerate within the next couple of days. What I find to be more significant about the profile from my explorations was that this kid was leaving comments on his own videos and then replying to his own comments on his own videos. That's probably the most telling thing that I think you can take away from this, beyond all the furry stuff. This was a deeply lonely young man who, it would appear to me, was ashamed to tell his grandfather that he was living out of his truck, deeply angry with society, with a political belief system that does not fit cleanly into either Democrat or Republican. I don't know if I did left or right there, but whatever. It doesn't matter. This is a really tragic case of a disillusioned young man left out to dry by a society in which all institutions other than the government bureaucracy or academia have been completely dismantled. Again, religious institutions that could have helped out this young man, cultural institutions, neighborhood level institutions, all completely dismantled in favor of bureaucracy. And so young men like this are just left in the wind until they do something stupid that gets the nation's attention. And that's where we are. That's ultimately what I think is the biggest takeaway from this, is an angry, lonely young man who did something really terrible. And we need to be talking about ways to fix these things. You know, how do we fix this? You know, what as a society, like, what do we start doing about this? Quickly, I do want to touch on another case from Milwaukee from a couple of days ago. On June 26th, so just a couple of days before the Idaho shooting, 2 Milwaukee police officers were ambushed. A young man jumped out of a bush with a gun as they were responding to a domestic violence call, and opened fire, killed one of the police officers. He just succumbed to his wounds yesterday, tragically. The other officer is okay. He's at home now. He is recovering with his family. But this is just terrible. And there's 2 main reasons I really wanted to make sure I touched on this story about this officer. One reason is simply the fact that the biggest accounts that are getting the most retweets that are covering this topic are specifically police unions. I would expect that, especially in the wake of firefighters being shot, police are going to be considered by other first responders. Firefighters often have a lot of political control, more than you might think, especially in areas such as Milwaukee. I would expect police to become more galvanized at a time when it should be more important than ever for the public and the police to come together to make a path forward where we can have both comprehensive, good, ethical policing and hold police accountable for their crimes should they commit them. It would seem that we're going in a completely different direction, and, you know, organizations that support police and the police themselves are becoming more insulated from the public and becoming more insulated in their belief systems. You know, there are infamous stories about such like in Los Angeles and the actual gangs that form within police departments. We're just losing the ability to even have good conversations about what police should do, what the role of police should be. And with police now also being important to, say, firefighters and first responders, EMTs, police presence is going to be required anytime they go anywhere. So I expect the police to gain more political power at this point where they are turning more insular. And the second reason I really wanted to make sure I talked about this was that apparently the shooter of this Milwaukee officer, Tremaine Jones, 22 years old, who has been caught, was shortly after the shooting, apparently is a former Kia boy who was given deferred prosecution by a judge named Hannah Dugan. And you might know Hannah Dugan as the judge who was arrested for allowing a migrant to escape her courtroom, thus drawing the ire of the Trump administration. I would suspect this case becomes very politically charged very, very quickly and may start to sweep through conservative outlets and then get a more twisted version in mainstream media as they try to spin Dugan as some sort of a hero. It's just a mess. And we have both sides, neither of whom want to work together at this point. More interested in casting the other as being a bunch of idiots, which they often are, as people are in general. But when you're unable to even come to the table together, it just gets worse. And we're completely unable to do that. So that's the current place, and that's currently where the United States is. It's great. Everything is on fire. But, you know, this is fine. This is fine. This is fine. I will see you guys soon.